Okay, let's get going. Apologies for starting a little bit late, but hopefully we can get through our work for today. So here we are. We're on the week of June 28th. You can see, maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger. So you can see we're covering chapters 13, 14, and 20. When it comes to what's going to be on the next exam, we're going to be looking at chapter 20, right? 20 is basically going to cover loops and arrays. And then chapters 13 and 14 starts going into Excel. So Excel will be on the final. So you don't have to worry about that for exam 2. So what you've been covering from earlier on, whether it's the pseudocode, whether it's like the flowcharts, or essentially JavaScript, really the exam 2, for the most part, the big emphasis is on the JavaScript, okay? So you'll be covering that for exam 2 that's coming up next Wednesday. It will be basically very similar in terms of like the logistics and format as what you just did for exam 1. And I know we've been starting to get some of the assignments and the exam graded. So I think it's going to be pretty soon. I know Guangyang is in the middle of moving, so hopefully he can get his stuff sorted. He can get the scores back to you soon. So hopefully by the end of this week, you should definitely have your assignment 1 graded, your exam 1 graded. Okay. If there's any problems, let me know. But I think from the most part, for what I can see, it looks like most people did pretty well on exam 1. So keep up the good work. But if you didn't do as well as you would like, we have the second chance policy, and that's where you're going to have like the part 1 of the final exam. If you do better on that, you can apply that score to the exam 1 grade. Okay, but like I said, I think many of you did quite well on exam 1. So hopefully, that continues. And for those that didn't do as well as they would like, hopefully we can address that with the second chance policy. If it may not be already apparent to you, you might also see that actually the exams don't really count as much towards your grade as your assignments do. So you really, if you had to choose between like one versus the other, you really want to focus on making sure your assignments are submitted properly. We have office hours. We can also have custom office hours on demand. So you just have to send us an email and we'll have a custom office hour to cover whatever you need to cover. Okay. So let me come back to here for a second. What I did here, so I posted just recently, in case you didn't know, some sample questions for exam 2. So you can take a look at that so you get some idea of some of the things we'll be testing, but it's really going to be testing the ins and outs of JavaScript, I should say. Okay. So you should be able to study for just by, taking examples that we've talked about in class, and whatever you cover in book and whatever you see in W3 schools. I've asked the TAs to cover more on this to prepare for the exam. You should come to the recitation with any questions, notably on things like this. If you look at the sample questions, if you don't have an idea on these, make sure you talk to the TAs. They'll make time for you during the recitation or during custom office hours, like I said. So that's important. Let's come back to here and let's look at course objectives for part 2. And let's see if I can zoom this a little bit. Okay, so like I said, algorithms, flowcharts, and pseudocode. So you remember, like during one of my earlier lectures, I drew like some analogies to you, like, having a recipe to, cook something, right? Cookies or pizza or whatever, right? So you think about that, you be able to apply that type of concept to doing programs, right? So you might have like this, laid out series of steps that you have to follow. One way to look at it is like draw like a flow chart. Like a flow chart starts to kind of narrow it down a little bit and be able to say definitively. So like for your assignment 2, you know, there's a distinct set of things that you're choosing from. Are you choosing to go to Bellagio, or you're choosing to go to the Wynn? You know, which flight are you going to take out there? If you choose one flight versus another, how much is your plane ticket going to be? Like those are kind of clear, distinct things that, you know, you're going to apply. So you're going to have like this logic, which you'll draw on the flow charts, which you did as part of your assignment 2. But that's still not ready for programming into a computer yet, right? That's kind of just more like for a person to start to put down on paper how they think this will flow, okay? And then you get into pseudocode. That starts getting closer, but it's still not 100%. So there were some people asking me about, oh, do I have to declare variables for pseudocode? You don't, right? So you declare variables as part of actually really programming, but pseudocode is kind of like the step just before you get into real coding. And what happens is like pseudocode is kind of like your general programming logic, but it doesn't get very specific, right? So in some cases, like some languages don't require you to really declare a variable, right? And you don't want to kind of get stuck on one syntax of one language versus another. So you have this general concept. It's almost like real code. That's why it's called pseudocode. And then I could implement it in JavaScript, but I could also implement another programming language. Okay, so that hopefully people can kind of see the idea of like how you start from like kind of human thinking with flowcharts, translating closer to like programming with the computer with pseudocode. And then finally, you'll get into implementation with JavaScript in our case, in our class, okay? And so, you know, when you look at this, these are some of the key ideas that you want to get out of this chapters, right? Chapters 10 and 17. So you want to be able to think about these. If there's any questions about any of these concepts that you don't understand, make sure you let me know. Some of the sample questions I put out there sort of line up to this. So, you know, things that are Booleans, right? So you'll see on the sample exam, we're going to ask you to like evaluate Boolean expressions. Okay. How do you deal with strings versus numbers? That's kind of an important thing, right? So there's differences, right? So I give you an example. You know, I have two numbers, maybe, right? They could be numbers or they could be strings. You remember last time I was telling you in JavaScript, like sometimes you can't really tell. You look at it, is like that one, the number 1 or the character 1, right? And that's why you have to put that number with the parentheses around it to make it like tell the JavaScript that it really is like a number 1, right? And so you might think, oh, what's the big deal? Who cares, right? The difference is that you remember the 2 fixed thing that you put in there to make it 2 decimal places. If you do that on something that's a string, it's not going to work, right? It's going to give you like an NaN or a syntax error, which I'll show you in a second, okay? The other thing is like, we talk about this idea of concatenation. Concatenation is like you're adding things together, right? Now, if I put a plus sign in between 2 strings, it's going to concatenate those 2 strings together. So put string 1 plus the string 2 together, or otherwise concatenating them, okay? Now, if I put a plus sign between 2 numbers, obviously I'm going to add those 2 numbers, right? So these are things you need to pay attention to as part of like, you know, understanding the JavaScript, okay? I think we spent a decent amount of time talking about variable names. Are they legal? Are they illegal? Okay, so, you know, that's pretty important. You want to make sure you know that. You know, understand the idea between declarations and assignments. Okay. And then I think I mentioned last time comparisons, right? So you remember 1 equal sign is an assignment, right? 2 equal signs is a comparison, right? And actually 3 equal signs is a comparison, but you don't need to worry too much about that in this class, right? That's kind of like just a more refined level of comparison. The main thing you want to understand is 1 equal sign is assignment, 2 equal signs is comparison, okay? And then declaring a variable is declaring it right at the beginning. And you remember at the beginning, you could also declare and initialize or assign a value to that variable all in one shot, right? So you can declare the variable like ABC equals to whatever, 1, 2, 3, something like that, right? So you declare the variable and then you assign it a value all in one shot, okay? So make sure you understand the concept, declarations and assignments, okay? Decisions, that's really from what I was saying, doing your comparisons, right? If this variable equals to whatever value, then do this, right? So the if, the conditional that you want to make sure you understand. So just like, we're going to take your code from like your pseudocode and your flowchart assignment, assignment 2, and make that into real code. So if you go in there and you kind of say, if, package, or if the flight equals to, first class, the ticket price is $600, right? Equals to $600, right? So that's part of like your decision. You're going to use an if statement to do that, right? So there's nested conditions. As you can see, you probably saw the nested conditions when you were looking at your flow chart and your pseudocode as part of assignment 2, okay? You can see I actually X'd out a couple of different things that's normally there that you have to know from the spring semester, I should say, right? So I kind of narrowed it down to these that you should try to pay attention to, okay? Right, so you don't have to worry about operator overload. You don't have to worry about effectiveness and finiteness and definiteness, right? But these other things, I believe we covered in class or in recitations. So make sure you try to know these. Here's some practices here, okay? And then we have the event-driven programming, which we put together some stuff from last week. On-click, on-change event is pretty important. Know the difference between compile time and runtime, or logic errors. Those are 3 categories of errors you should make sure you understand. And then there's some resources here, some more vocabulary, which I X'd out some that you don't need to know. Okay, and then functions. Right, and then I'm doing arrays and loops right now. And then all of these terms here. Okay, so that's exam 2. I know it's a lot, and I know it's not that much more since you just took exam 1. But like I said, this is a compressed class, so we'll try to cover as much as we can. And I want to make myself available. So, really try to go through this stuff. If you have something that you're really getting stuck on, make sure you send me an email. I believe I respond to my emails fairly quickly. And we'll get back to you whichever way, whether it's myself or the TAs. We'll do office hours with you, schedule private office hours, whatever, and make sure we cover any concepts that you're stuck on, okay? So, let's hopefully we can continue on a good record that you guys have done with exam 1, get a good score for exam 2, and then it's on to the final, okay? I have to say this is probably the hardest part of the 3 parts of the class. I kind of think the Excel part is actually pretty easy, right? So we can get over the hump with the JavaScript stuff. I think the Excel stuff actually should be pretty easy. So hopefully that makes some people feel better if they're wondering, does this class get harder? This is probably the hardest part. And then probably the next part with the Excel is probably the easier part, okay? So yeah, take a look at this announcement that I put out, has some sample questions. Some of the questions, obviously, we didn't cover yet, so that's fine. I went into my resources. I didn't post out for the next lecture yet, but what I did post out is good enough for you guys to look at for if you're trying to start to prepare to study for exam 2. So if you scroll down, you can see we're here. So I already put out the slides for the loop lecture and the arrays lecture slides. You don't have to worry about chapter 13 yet, as far as like the exam goes. That goes into spreadsheets, and that's going to be for the final exam, okay? And as usual, I have a breakdown of the different things here. I have the different topics and whatnot. One thing I did do, which might be useful for some of you, is I did a review of some common mistakes. So last semester I did like a video talking about like some common mistakes in terms of exactly what I just mentioned to you verbally. The comparison versus the assignment, the equal sign, like one equal, double equal, very important. And then also talking about numbers versus strings. So that's another important thing that trips up a lot of people, okay? And then I also did some stuff with debugging and whatnot. So these two might be interesting for you to take a look at in your time, okay? All right, so let's get going then. So here's a couple of different things. You might have seen it already where you can kind of go into a debug console and you can kind of see if there's errors and whatnot. And then you have this validator, right? So you remember like last week I talked about the validator for HTML. Now you have the validator for JavaScript, okay? It's unfortunate because a lot of times we're actually mixing the HTML and the JavaScript together in one shot. So it would be kind of good if you actually have one thing that you really can kind of, validate everything in one shot. But unfortunately, that's kind of what's out there. And some of the stuff kind of works okay with both things together, but it's still not exactly what you're turning in for your homework assignment, right? So you kind of have to remember to take some things out and, pretty some things up before you submit it for your programming assignment. Your programming assignment, what you're submitting is an HTML file, right? So the HTML file has like, all of the different things for the formatting plus the JavaScript all in one place, right? Some of these validating tools are kind of focused on one thing, whether it's the HTML part or the JavaScript part. So it's not 100% comprehensive on everything, but some of them are kind of close. So I think I mentioned this before. I used the js.do, and generally I think it's pretty decent. In this case, it's really kind of showing just the JavaScript part, but you can actually do a decent amount of like inline HTML and whatnot. So it's kind of okay. But still the emphasis is on the JavaScript stuff. So let me just kind of point to that here. So I think this was like the gas station one here. So I'm over here and here's the browser, what you would see on your browser, right? And I didn't have any formatting. You can see there's not any of the background color or anything like that. So I only took the body. So you can see here, like it highlights these different colors here. So that's kind of one issue, although this is one of those type of things about HTML. It's kind of a little bit forgiving. Like it kind of just says, oh yeah, I kind of get what you're trying to do. And it just kind of keeps it going. But if you run it through here, you can see right away, there's some error here. Okay. So, I'm looking at it. You remember we talk about HTML, a lot of times it comes in pairs, right? And so when you see this, then you can see this here. And then you're looking at this one, it's like this red color and you don't see where's the other one for it. Okay, now this JS.do is not that perfect, right? Because it's really focused on JavaScript. When I do this on Notepad++, you will actually see like it kind of tries to line things up a little bit. Okay, so you kind of see this. You can see number one, I double click on it. You can see like all the references here, but you can also kind of see like the pairing here. Okay, so I did that. You see that pairing here. Oops, like no pair. What, so that's an error, right? So you can see it's not like one super awesome tool that I can like hit everything. I kind of, mix and match a couple of different things here. Okay, but anyway, I'm not going to belabor the point. So let me take this guy out here. So good, that should be done, right? So now I run it and whatever, I can do something here. It doesn't matter what I'm trying to get to these certain type of errors here. Now you can see here's another one here where you can say, well, that looks kind of right to me, right? I have a P here, but wait, this is an uppercase P, right? So that's what it should be. And you can see that fixes it here, okay? And the tricky thing about these type of things, it's not like every time that it blows it up, you can see it actually on the right side, it's working, right? no problems actually, right? But it actually technically is an issue. Now, let's actually break something, right? So let's say some reason I screwed up my function here. So instead of to fixed, I forgot to put in the T here, okay? Now let's see what happened. I'm gonna run it. Looks fine, no issues there, right? But then, let me see here. I'm gonna click on this, and by me clicking, you remember we're doing stuff based on event-driven programs. So me clicking on this is an event, right? So once I clicked on this, it tried to do something, right? You see this on click here, right? On click. So I hit this generated on click event. So it went into here, and then you can see what happened here. It says, oh, fixed is not a function. Well, yeah, of course, it's not a function, right? So that it caught this error. Okay, well, you kind of have to know that there's, this is not a function, right? So, but this is kind of how it helps you to figure out there's an issue, right? If you just did this on a regular web page, you would have no idea. It's not going to say anything. It's just going to crap out on you. Or you might see it on a console or something. But here, because I did it in this js.do, then you can see this little uncaught error, type error, okay? So this kind of little bit of example of how you can troubleshoot things. So sometimes when you're running stuff on your browser, you can't figure out what's going on, right? Which I'm pretty sure that's going to happen to you when you work on your assignment. Then you just paste your code into something like this, and you can kind of maybe get some hints, okay? So one part of where I got some hints was actually my editor itself. So you look at this, Notepad++ is, well, it's plus, right? It's better than your Notepad, right? So it has like these little things that kind of help you a little bit, like this, okay? Then when you go into something like js.do and you try to run this, you can get little helpful things like this to see that something's wrong. Or like I showed you down here, some little different color issues here, then it kind of points you to where something might be wrong, okay? So anyway, let me just run this just so you can see that it's doing something. Well, actually, did I fix this? Yeah, I fixed it. So let me run this again. So boom, 250, 10 gallons, prefer customer, calculate total, and you got that, okay? I think I gave this as like in-class homework last week. I think a lot of you did it pretty well, and you got it to work. But you can see the code here. This covers a lot, right? When you look at this, you got variable declaration here. You got event-driven programming here. You have radio buttons here. You have text box here. You have like another text box here. You have another radio button. And then you have a regular button for you to input to do a calculation, right? Again, event-driven programming. And then you're setting this value here based on this calculation here. You have multiplication here, and then you have your output here. So when I think about like preparing for exam 2, and I think about like coming up with example code, this would be an ideal candidate, right? This covers a lot of different things that you want to be able to do. You want to be able to work with text box. You want to be able to work with buttons. You want to be able to work with radio buttons. You have variable declarations. You have calculations. So you got like the whole shebang here. So you want to make sure you carry this over as an example to prepare for your exam. Okay. So this is for loops, which I'll step into in a second. Another one, JavaScript Validator. But again, you can see here, you're just typing in JavaScript. So it's not a mixture of HTML and JavaScript. You're only putting in. So you remember, I don't know if you remember, but let me put that down here. So there's two places that you see JavaScript. One is between when I talk about JavaScript, there's two places you see JavaScript when you're looking at HTML or HTML page. It's when you see script, right? So you see script here, and you can see like JavaScript. I can type all kinds of stuff in here, JavaScript, right? And this could be done either in the head or the body, right? So I only have the body here, right? But if I had the head, I could have put a script up there too, okay? And if you remember from last time, the script at the top is basically where I would put functions, and there will be functions that I can access anywhere within my HTML. Okay, so I can have a whole bunch of stuff at the bottom, and I can call my function that I declared on my head script without any issues. So it just kind of makes things nice and organized, right? You can see your common functions all in one place at the top, right? You could declare, you can group all of your variables up there too, I guess, right? That's fine too. I will kind of try to cover a little bit about variable scoping when I get a chance. So here is like the other place you would see JavaScript. Wherever you see like an event and you see these double quotes here, or quotes, I should say, you can see on click, on click, on click. Where's there more stuff? There's another on click here, right? And there's other types of events too, right? There could be on change event or something like that, right? So any of those type of events where you see these quotes, all of that stuff inside of there is also JavaScript. And when you see like a variable in here, you can access this variable, right? So if I declared this variable, it looks like it's two separate things, right? I have a script up here and I have something down here, and you're saying, well, they're two separate things. Why would I see it? That's just the way JavaScript's set up. You can access like these variables in other places. And that's how you can set this value. So this on click has some JavaScript code here. And then you also have this thing over here. So this variable is accessible by this on click event. So on click event, I can see total cost output dot value, right? I initialize it to blank, right? So in here, I can see this, right? So that's just like a feature of like JavaScript where you can do stuff in different places and it's accessible by other parts, even though it doesn't look like they should be connected, okay? So these are the different places that you see JavaScript when you look at like an HTML page or something like that, okay? All right, so let's come back to here. Yeah, so I just did a demo that kind of shows this, right? This JavaScript error. Okay. I think we did a number of these. There's a common type of thing doing like temperature conversion and stuff like that. So the logic to do that. And now I remember, I think I asked you guys to do like this temperature conversion as part of like the radio buttons, right? So I think most of you got that sorted out properly. If you didn't, and you don't understand how to do radio buttons to flip between like one conversion to another, let me know, okay? So more JavaScript Validator, right? And then tutorials, right? You have W3 schools and whatnot to talk about functions and whatnot. But let's see if we can provide some more function examples here, okay? So now we're gonna step into the idea of loops. Okay, so for loops, this might be something that you would do over and over again, right? And you can see this little circle loop thing going on here, right? So it's playing the same song over and over again, right? So why would you do that? Well, you have something like this, right? So you have something that you're kind of doing something very similar, like over and over again, right? So in this case, I'm going to keep on adding 1 plus 1, right? So I have back to this whole accumulator idea, right? This CNT, you can see CNT equals to CNT plus 1, okay? And then it's going to do the same thing again, right? CNT equals to CNT plus 1. So what it's doing is basically just keeps on adding all the way through, okay? Over and over again. But you as a programmer, you don't want to have copies of this all over the place, right? You're not gonna, number one, you're not gonna wanna, even whether you're gonna copy and paste this, right? If I took this whole thing and keep on copy and paste, it's sort of like annoying, right? So you're gonna go ahead and put this into a loop, okay? All right, so what does a loop look like? So a loop will start off like this. First, you wanna initialize the variables, right? So the variables here, right? You can see these variables. You want to start at something, right? If I start to do some counting or whatever, you got to start somewhere. You can't just start counting from like some random number, right? So you initialize these variables to something, right? Could be 0, could be 1, or whatever, right? So you have to initialize these variables, right? And then you have to test whether it's true or false, right? So it'll be something where if it's less than, in this case, I'm keeping a count, right? If it's less than or equal to y, then I'm going to continue to do some work here, right? So this is not a loop, right? But this is kind of laying down like something that can be converted to a loop, right? So the test here in this case is CNT less than or equal to y, right? Y being 3 here, okay? So it's gonna basically start from 1 and see 1 here, and it's going to keep on going until it's 3, right? So CNT plus CNT plus 1, I should say, keeps on incrementing it by 1. So it starts off at 1, then it becomes 2, then it becomes 3, and then once it gets over 3, it's going to stop, okay? And then each time it passes that test, it's going to say the answer times X, okay? So here's the test. When it fails the test, or when it becomes, in the last case, when it becomes 4, which is greater than 3, greater than the count, then it will stop. It comes out, right? But until it gets to that point, the test is true, and it continues to do the body of the loop, right? In this case, it's the increment, right? You're going to increment here. And so that's what all of this is all about here. On the left-hand side, you can see 4. That tells the computer that you're doing a loop, all right? And then you're going to start off with something. In this case, we're going to say r equals to 1. That's the initialize here. R is less than 11. This is the test, right? And then r plus plus is the increment, okay? So that's how these loops fit into this here, this little text that you see on the sideline here, this for loop here, okay? So try to understand that. So during the exam, we might ask you, okay, where's the initialization at? Where's the test at? Where's the body at? And where's the increment at for this for loop? Okay, so you have to kind of match it up to here, right? In this case, it happens to not be showing the body here. You're basically executing these statements here, okay? But you can see the initialize, you can see the test, and you can see the increment over here, okay? So try to understand that concept. This is for a for loop, okay? So here's another, talking about it, like, laying things out, right? The control variable, the test condition, the instructions to execute, the update of the control variable, and the way to exit, okay? In case you didn't catch that, the control variable in this case is R. Oops, I just clicked on this here, okay? Okay, so it's a for loop, not sideways now. Now it's going to left to right, okay? But it's the same thing, right? For loop, you initialize j equals to 1, and then while j is less than or equal to 3, you do this statement list here. And in the meantime, each time you loop through, you're gonna do j plus plus, right? J equals to j plus 1. J plus plus is kind of like a shorthand to say exactly this, right? So make a note of that one, right? You can say j equals to j plus 1, or you can say j plus plus to increment the j. Just a reminder, these things are separated by semicolons here. Okay. Okay, I think I actually put this into my JSDO, right? But in this case, another for loop, right? Var j equals to 0. Now I started at 0, and then j less than 3, and then j equals to j plus 1, and then it's dripping. And this is concatenation, right? So this is a string, right? So text plus drip means that you're going to take the text, you're going to keep on concatenating or adding this string afterwards. Okay, and that's how you end up with this. If I run it, where did I put it? Here we go. And I get an alert box, right? It says drip, 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 right? All night long, right? So make a note of that, right? So I have 3 drips here, which came from this for loop here. Then finally, I came out of the for loop and I took the whole thing to add all night long at the end here, okay? So make a note of this. This is like what I mentioned as part of what we're going to look at for the exam, the idea of concatenation by using this plus sign, right? So if I have 2 numbers and I add them with this plus sign, of course, I'll get, whatever you get when you add 2 numbers together, right? But when I add 2 strings together, I get concatenation, okay? And this is where it's super important you understand whether the things you're working with, are they text or are they numbers, okay? So that's kind of like a tricky thing you need to watch out for. Okay. Yeah, so now we have some math. You can do the same thing here. All right, so what does this do? Okay, have a think about that. And then I'm going to talk you through it, right? But I just kind of give you a chance. I don't want it to just be me kind of talking at you all the time. Just have a think. Take a look at this for loop and think for yourself. What do you think this is doing? Okay. Right. Okay. So if I look at this, okay, I initialized the variable j equals to 1, right? So this is my, what they call the control, right? So this tells me how many times I'm going to keep on looping this, right? So my number is 5 here, right? So it's going from 1 to 5. So it's 5 times, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? It's going to keep on going through, okay? Now at the same time, I'm going to take my answer, which starts off at 0, okay? So it's going to be, it starts off answer, the first time through, answer is 0 equals to 0 plus j. So what is j right now? Okay, so j is 1. Okay, now the next time through, you can see this, j equals to j plus 1. So what happens here? Well, j is now 2, right? So I took my prior answer, which was 1, right? And I said 1 plus 2, right? So now my new answer is going to be 3, okay? And then now j equals 3 because now I pushed it up by 1, right? So now, j is going to be 3, okay? So 3, now I said the answer equals the answer plus j, okay? And from the prior round, it was 3 already, right? So then 3 plus 3 equals to 6, okay? So then it will come on through, okay? And then j is now 4, okay? And then it's going to come around to here. And remember, our answer was 6 from the last time it was working, right? So then it will be 6 plus 4 equals to 10, okay? Now I come around, this is the last time through now, because now it's going to be 5, right? You remember this number 5 here is the control here. J is less than or equal to 5. So j is 5. And you remember last time through, it was 10, right? So now you have 10 plus 5 equals to 15. And then you get 15. Okay? So you're looping through 5 times, and you keep on adding these numbers together. It's sort of like accumulating here, okay? So again, same idea, okay? You see this very often with loop processing, doing these type of things, okay? And the reason why you might see it is for the next lecture I'm going to be doing is going to be talking about arrays, right? So you'll see when I start talking about arrays, like arrays can be ginormous, and it's like all these little boxes all over the place. you don't want to have to kind of list out every single box. And the best way to kind of traverse or go through the arrays is use these loops, right? So these loops keep on counting and it automatically goes all the way through. Just imagine, think for yourself, if I asked you to print out or write some code to print out the multiplication table, right? If I printed out literally each slot on the multiplication table one by one, that would be, you'll be getting like carpal tunnel syndrome or something, right? It'll be like crazy, right? But if you have like the for loop, you can bang that out in 2 lines of code, and all of a sudden you have the multiplication table, right? So having the loops and be able to use that to do things like multi-dimensional arrays or whatever, it can be hugely powerful. So, we'll get into that for the next lecture, okay? Yeah, so j equals to j plus 1. I mentioned this here, j plus plus, right? This one is a little bit less common, but it also works. The plus equals. I kind of think I'd rather not use this. I'd rather just use the j plus plus at best. I kind of look at this class as, sort of introduction to some programming. So I kind of think doing something like this is the most easy or most clear to understand. I kind of think of like doing j plus plus or plus equal is like shorthand for like programmers, like computer science people that are doing this stuff. But, it's nice to know. If you want to do this, that's fine, right? But I think I usually look at intro programmers as the code this way with j equals to j plus 1. Okay, at best, you go into this. You go into like j plus equals. I consider that to be more like, dedicated programmers and stuff like that. Okay, but anyway, you can say that's something to know, right? And you might get asked that on the exam. Okay, so just make a note of that. Now it's interesting, a lot of times we always give you examples starting from 1 or 0 and then keeps on incrementing up, but it doesn't always have to go that way. You can start off with negative, right? You can see this -5 here, right? You can actually do fractional numbers, right? So no one says it has to be an integer, right? So you can do something like this. The thing you have to be careful when you use fractional numbers, it's very easy to make a stupid mistake and you get like a logical error, right? And that's when you get into like infinite loops because you never hit the value that you want, right? So it's very easy to screw things up when you use fractional numbers, but you can do it, right? In this case, you're doing, 3.5 and you keep on going up by 0.5 and whatever, right? And then you also do not have to go up in increments of 1, right? I always give you examples in increments of 1, but it doesn't have to be 1, right? So in this case here, you're starting from 0 and it's going up by units of 5. So in this case, goes 0 to 5 to 10, right? Because your exit out is going to be less than or equal to 10, okay? And you can also go down, right? So look what happens here. You can do j equals to j minus 1. That means you're starting from the top going down, okay? So it's fair game. We can ask you to implement different types of for loops, either going from 0 up to 10, or it could be going from 10 to 0. It could be going from 0 up to 10 in increments of 0.5. You can start off from a -5 and work your way up. You can start off from a positive number and work your way down to a negative number. All of those things are valid and it's fair game for your for loops, okay? And of course, like I mentioned, infinite loops are not cool, right? You don't want to do infinite loops, okay? So make sure that, you think it through. Look at this. Will this thing keep on going forever? So pay attention to these loops and make sure that the end condition is going to be met. If it's never met, then all of a sudden you have an infinite loop, okay? And the loop will never end. And someone's going to have to kill your program. It's just going to keep on churning away until either you kill it or someone else outside kills it. All right, now there's an idea of nesting loops, and this is what I was talking about, doing like a two-dimensional array, which would be like maybe to do your multiplication table. You can do that with this nested loops like this, okay? So let me just kind of explain this a little bit. So every one time that it does something here, within it, it does another for loop, right? So let's say in this case, we're talking about minutes and seconds, right? So in this case, let's say I do minute 1, right? So minute 1 comes around, so I go into here, and then within that, I have 60 seconds, right? Everyone knows there's 60 seconds in a minute, right? So I'm gonna keep on going, churning away for 60 seconds before I come back out to the outer loop, and then I go to minute number 2, right? So that's a pretty, I think everyone kind of knows how time works, right? So this is pretty clear way for you to see how you could nest the loops, right? So for every one of the outer loop, you're doing something on the inside. In this case, for every 1 minute, you're doing 60 seconds, okay? A pretty common thing here, you do something like this. You can do this star, and you can do these nested for loops here, okay? And you remember from your HTML, what does your BR mean? Okay. Let me just kind of just say, in case you don't remember, it's your break, right? So your for loop, and you're going to have your line break, okay? And so with these different for loops, you can play around with those step combinations I was just talking about up here, like these different types of things, and you can get like different types of output coming here on the right side, right? So in this case, you can see what it's doing here, and note the call plus plus. This is actually not correct, right? This is actually should be, I don't know why there's a space there. So var row equals to 1, and then you're going to do up to 10. Or less than 10 actually, right? So it's a less than sign here. So it's less than 10, and you're going to keep on going up by 1 for your rows, okay? And then you have your columns. So every row, you're going to go and you're going to look at a column, and the column is going to say, oh, is a column less than the row? And it's going to write out the star, right? So as you can imagine, if I had to look at this super quickly, I'm thinking, okay, what is this doing, right? Well, very quickly, you can see, well, you're starting off with a low number, right? So row equals to 1, col equals to 1. So if I'm doing something where col is less than row, column is less than row, then probably I'm not going to go through too many loops here, because you know that you're starting off with a pretty low number here, right? So when it comes through, maybe the first time it doesn't print anything, right? Because it's not less than anything, right? But then the second time it's less than, let's say less than 2, right? And then it will print out a star. And then next time the number, the row keeps on getting bigger and bigger. And therefore, because the row gets bigger and bigger, the number of times that you have to increment through with the column gets bigger too. And that's very quickly, if they look at this very quickly, you can start to see that all of a sudden you'll get more stars going all the way down to here. So that's why you see, it looks almost like half a Christmas tree, right? Okay. And then likewise, we're going to work our way down, right? Now you start off with a high number, and then you do a row minus minus. So now your rows are getting smaller and smaller, but you have to make sure you double check on this. Your row is now checking the other way. You have to make sure that your number is bigger than or equal to 1. So as you can imagine, you start off with more of these star signs, these asterisks at the top, and getting smaller and smaller each time. So now you flip this tree upside down. Okay. And then this is just a quick intro for array. You don't have to worry too much about this, because I'm going to actually do another lecture on this shortly. Okay. So we're kind of like at break time here. So have a think about like some for loops, right? Again, there's a super key concept. So maybe for your in-class assignment and part of you preparing for your exam is you take some of these for loops here and just put some print statements in there. You can send me your screenshot of what those loops look like, right? So maybe you can do like, you know, for this for loop here, display the variable j for me, right? In this case, display j for me again, and j, right? So run the for loop, show me what the values for j are, So you can do, you know, like this here, the document write, right? So document write is essentially like you're doing like what it would be like if you put this in HTML. Don't do alert box because alert box is just going to show you the one thing, right? And it's going to show it as a pop-up box. So do it as a document write and do these for loops that I just showed you up here. Okay. So it should be fairly straightforward. The text is right here. So just type this in, put in those document writes, and show me what the output looks like. When you go for your exam, that's exactly what you're going to have to do. We're going to show you some for loops and you're going to tell us what that should look like. Okay. So you're kind of tracing through the code. Okay. So do that for your in-class assignment and I'll give you extra credit for it. And let's take a break at 6:53 right now. So let's come back at 6:58 and we're going to get into arrays. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so we're back, and hopefully everyone had a shot to take a look at this, the looping. If you have any more questions, you can send it to me after class and I'll take a look at it. So let's move on to the next one. Okay. Okay. All right. So let me see here. All right. So quickly before we move on, let's just do another for loop here. All right, same thing here. You got the script. Anything within the script is your JavaScript. I'm going to change this to be doing numbers. I'm going to start it to be 0. A plus plus. And let's see. Maybe I'm going to do a document right. Maybe I'll do a write of the number inside. Yeah, just copy this. Paste this here. Here. Okay. Probably do this. Here. There. Okay. So basically we're starting off here and then going up to here. And because I did the counter over here, I did the counter +1 here. That's why I start off at 1. Okay. So if I wanted it to be like show off at 0 first, then I have to kind of print it out like over here, like that. And then I would have a 0 like that. Okay. So you can see here, it starts off at this number here, but because I did the counter equals the counter +1, then that's why you got 1 the first time you went through this loop. Okay. All right. So hopefully that's another counter or another loop that you can refer to. Okay. See here. And where am I? Here. And then actually I don't want to, yeah, if I'll do this one. Okay. All right, so here we are with arrays here. Okay. Here. So how do we think about arrays? I think about arrays as sort of like a collection of buckets, right? So you have like these buckets and you have things inside of those buckets, right? You know, a more formal definition is a collection of data elements, okay? It helps us to organize data, and you can think of them as like kind of similar types of things, right? So you might think about, okay, I can look at like all the people in a class, let's say. Let me go back to this other one here. Okay, so here we have a group of people, right? So when we talk about an array, here's like me doing a declaration. In this case, I'm talking about people, right? But then you have this new little thing here called new array. This is me initializing the array. And I'm saying, instead of saying, without an array, you might be saying something like this. Let me initialize people 1 equals to Joe, people 2 equals to Mary, people 3 equals to Tom, and so on and so forth, right? And that is one way to do it without using an array, but that's probably not the most efficient way or easy way to do it. So in this case, what we're doing is saying, well, here's a new array, and in bucket 1, right, or data element 1, we have Joe, right? So these elements are all of a string type, right? Text, right? So we're having Joe, Mary, Tom, and so on and so forth, right? All the way through. So that's all the people in here, right? And now we have a for loop. If I want to print out the name of everyone in this array, you remember what I was saying in the first lecture, we were talking about how a for loop, or just loops in general, is very powerful in terms of processing the array, right? If I told you to print every single person in this array, you could, right, one by one, you'll type in Joe, Mary, or type in the variables for them or whatever. But you, again, it would be very monotonous, right? Here is one line of code, or one snippet of code that is basically going to print out everybody in your array. Okay, so you have this for loop and starts off at 0, and then the length of the people array, right? So I less than the length of the people array, and then keep on incrementing plus plus, I plus plus, and then you're going to be writing each of the elements. And here you see people I plus BR, right, is accessing each element of the array, this I part here. So this is how you access each element of the array. Okay. So actually, since I'm here, maybe I should just type this into JSDO so you can see what's going on here. Okay. So let me do this. So I'm going to type this in. You can type along with me if you want. You guys can probably type faster than I do, right? Type var people equals to new array. Joe. Doesn't really matter who I type in here, I guess. And I think I'm going to go with 4 people. That's good enough for me. And then I'm going to do the for loop. So with the for loop, it's nice that you can see this is a very generic piece of code. You have no idea what the size of the array for people is, right? It could be 2 people, it could be 100 people. It doesn't matter, right? And that's like a nice flexible piece of code that when you put it in, you don't have to keep on rewriting this later on. If you change the size of the array, let's say you put more people in here, it doesn't matter. You can put in as many people as you want, and it'll be fine. So people.length, this is important, like I said. So accessing this tells you, like the array, just like when you looked at the number, right? When I did the 2 fixed to say I'm going to use 2 decimal places, this is something that you get because you have something that's declared as a number, right? 2 fixed, make it 2 decimal place. Same thing with the array. By knowing that something is an array, you can access something like length to say, oh, this is how many elements are in this array. Okay. Plus plus to increment it. And I'm going to do the document right. people, that's the array. And then how do I get the element of the array? Is the I here, right? And then I'm going to do a carriage return. Okay, and then I'm going to close it off. And then I have to close off this for loop with the curly brackets like that. Okay, so let's run this. Let's see what we get. So we got Joe, Mary, Tom, Bill. Okay, so you have for loop, you process this, and you got this, right? Hopefully everybody can follow that. So that's a simple array declaration and initialization, right? And you also get this for loop, right? So it's a combination of the two parts of the lecture that we covered today. Okay, so do we not need the var? Yes, so JavaScript will let you get away with that, but that's not really good programming practice. Okay, so like I said, whether it's HTML or JavaScript, it's very forgiving in a certain sense, right? So it kind of lets you do all kinds of stuff, but if you want to think about like quote unquote proper programming or best practice, you want to declare the variable. So that's why you want to do the var and then the people equals, and then you want to do the new array. Now, this is not the only way you can declare an array, which I'll get to in a second, right? But do I need to put var here? No, right? Technically, I don't, and it will work fine. But like I said, it's not really good programming practice, right? It's good for it to be explicit. And, you know, just like I said before, you can actually declare variable anywhere you want, right? You don't have to do it at the top, let's say. But again, if I had to support this code, it's a mess. If you're declaring crap all over the place, like left and right, and yeah, you can say the code works, but it's a nightmare to support it, right? So there's very good programming practice, best practice that's been put out there over the years because people have been programming for a long time that kind of tell people how to organize your code properly so that you can debug it or other people can look at your code and understand what you're doing. Okay, so sorry for the long-winded answer on this, but you know, that's kind of you know, the point on this. There's a lot of things that syntactically, yeah, you don't have to do it, but from a good practice, good hygiene standpoint, you want to do stuff like that. Okay. All right, so I think I was talking about what is an array. Hopefully the example I just kind of gave you an idea. I think of it as a collection of data elements or buckets, right? And you can put whatever you want in there, right? It could be a bunch of numbers. It could be a bunch of, like in this case, we did a bunch of names or whatever, right? They're kind of similar types of things, right? You don't just stick any random things in there, right? It's not like your household inventory or something like that. You know, you want to be able to put in, you know, common things. So then you name the array to be appropriate given those common things, right? Maybe they're, you know, people in your class or something like that, right? So these are different things. If I want to break down, what do you call the array? Okay, all right. So these are arrays that are indexed, right? So your index is this red right here, right? Index. So key point to note, right? And that's why a lot of times you see for loops starting at 0. They'll initialize it at 0 because arrays start off at 0. So the first bucket is not 1, it's actually 0, right? So when you look at like all these different arrays, it's very important to, especially if you're using a for loop to process against the array, you want to keep this in mind. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for 5, let's say in this case. So hence, I start off with 0 here. Okay, so this is something very important. Make a note of it because a lot of times you don't remember this. All of a sudden, you forgot about the first element in the array, and you're off by 1 in all of your calculations. Okay, so remember this one is important. Your arrays start off in 0 for the first bucket. Okay, now 50, 75, 0, these are the actual data elements that are stored in the array. Okay. And then over here, hours worked, that's the name of the array, right? So you try to give the name of the array to be something that is meaningful. That kind of tells you a little bit about what is inside these buckets here, right? So now you're telling it, well, these are the hours worked, right? So it's 50, 75, whatever, right? Guess he had a heavy, I guess this person had a heavy work week or something here, 75, right? So the hours worked, the naming convention, like for the, it's very similar to arrays. Like, so what, I mean, not to arrays, to variables, right? So whatever you remember as valid variable names, it's going to apply for arrays too. So you can think of the names for arrays the same way as you're thinking about your variables, your JavaScript variables, okay? And you see that here, right? The same rules for variables and names for arrays, right? I should read that next time, right? Yeah, so the array names, you just think of them as variables, right? So use the same naming conventions. Don't, stick numbers in front of it and stuff like that. So I was telling you, there's multiple ways to declare an array, right? So see here, right? Now I declared a new empty array of 6. That's 6 elements in this array. I didn't say what value is in those buckets yet. So you can just say that I've almost like for a regular variable, I just declare the variable name. So in this case, I've declared a variable or an array, hours worked, as a new array with 6 elements in it. Okay, so this creates 6 index elements or buckets, right? And yeah, just like what I said in the prior slide, everything starts off at 0 for the index, right? So the index always starts with 0, right? And here, somehow magically, we put in those numbers here. It doesn't say how we put these numbers in here, but we could have easily done it with just like hours worked, open bracket, 0, close bracket, equals to 50. Right, let me just type that just so that you can see what I'm talking about here. So you can see here, what I was saying is it just declared a new array of 6, but it didn't tell me what the heck is in those buckets, right? It just said I created empty buckets here, right? Well, if I look at this, I'm thinking, well, how did 50 get in there? 50 didn't like just magically go in there. So what you would say is hours worked 0 element equals to 50, something like that. So that's how you assign it. Let me bring this back up to the top of the screen so you can see it. So that's another way for you to assign a value to the bucket of the array. Okay, so that's how you could have assigned these values in here. You could have done it just like similar to what we talked about, where you define the array and then you just list out all these commas and those values in there. That could be another way you assigned it also. Okay. Well, okay, here we go. It just kind of did what I just did here, except it used the third or bucket number 3, keeping in mind that we started at 0, right? I just moved this thing again. All right, so it took the bracket, right? Open and close bracket with the number 3, and then you put the equal sign, and then you would have put in a 5 here. Okay, you remember this dot length, right? That tells you how many elements are in this array, okay, or the size of the array. So in this case, it's going to return a 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, again, this is where I see a lot of bugs, because you see hours worked dot length as 6, and then you start counting at 1, and then you're off by 1, right? So you have to remember that you start off at 0, right? And that's why you see a lot of for loops. You will initialize at 0, and it'll be either you say less than the hours worked dot length, or you would say less than or equal to hours dot length minus 1, right? Because when I say hours dot length is 6, but then notice what's the last element here? It's 5. Okay, so it doesn't matter one way or the other. just make sure you don't kind of cross over the edge here, thinking that the hours.length equals to 6. That means that I'm going to have an element number 6 out here at the end. It doesn't exist. Okay. So hence you see this thing, length of array -1, because you started at 0. Okay. All right, so like I said, you could have done exactly like this, right? You can do like each element one by one, and then putting in like all these values like this. In this case, you're assigning all the strings day of the week, right, to each of the buckets for weekdays. Okay. Yeah, so just it's talking about in referencing whatever today is, right? So in this case, weekdays 2, 3, which is here, is Thursday, right? So then when I show today, I do the alert for today, I think you can probably guess it's going to show Thursday, right? So it's going to show this. It's going to show like that. It's taking this bucket, which happens to hold Thursday, and assigning it to today. And then it's going to print out today. Okay. So indexing example. So we've been giving a lot of examples where we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever, right? Like all these examples up here. But you don't have to do it that way. It's just something that evaluates to a number, right? So in this case, okay, dwarf 0 equals to happy, dwarf 1 equals to sleepy, right? This is a variable, right? This variable is do equals to 2, right? So because it evaluates to a 2, it's defined as a number, it evaluates to 2, this is valid. I don't have to put a 2 in here. I can put in a variable that stores the value 2, and by doing that, I can get this, okay? So pay attention to these type of things, because when we ask you to trace through code, you might see something like this, okay? Now, by the same token, when I say evaluate to a number, I can do something like this. I can say do, which is 2 plus 1 equals to 3, right? So dwarf 3 equals to sneezy, okay? Likewise, I can do 2 times the, right, which is 4, right? And you get bashful. And I can do 3 times the -1, okay? And that will give me 5, okay? And some more math, right? Whole bottom line here is that something that evaluates to a number or integer is valid when it comes to an array, okay? Now, what's not valid is if I do like 5.5, there is no like array to say there's an element 5.5, right? So everything here is an integer. As long as you evaluate to an integer, it works. Okay, so I hope that's clear to everyone. All right, so here we go again. Now we're going to be doing like math answers, right? Now we have a new array. It's an empty array because I just said new array 4. I didn't initialize it. I didn't do anything. All right, so then I have the var, 0, right? This is the for loop, right? And then I less than math answers dot length. Again, I was saying how common this is, right? So you have the length of the array for math answers, and then you have the I++, the increment +1, okay? And then you have the math answers equals to I times 3. Okay, so you're basically looping through with this I for all the elements of the array, and you're taking it times 3, right? So the first time through, you're going to be at 0 because they're initializing your variable at 3. I mean, at 0, I should say, right? And then it's going to be times 3, which would be 0. Okay. Now, next time through, what's I going to be? I++, it's going to equal to 1, right? So then the math answer is 1 equals to 1 times 3, right? Then the next time you go through is 2 times 3, 3 times 3, right? Keeps on going through, right? So it's going to, well, it does 2 things here. It does the alert, right? So it's going to keep on popping up those annoying boxes, and you're going to have to keep on clicking on it. And then you're going to have to document write, right? And then it's going to write this, okay? So the fact that it has like 0, 3, I think that's not quite right, right? Oh yeah, okay, it's printing out the whole array. That's my mistake, right? It's printing out the whole array. I thought it was just printing out one variable at a time. Yeah, so yeah, it's printing out the whole array, and that's what you're gonna get, okay? All right, so this is just from the end of the last lecture. Just as an example again, we have an array of people, okay? And then this is just how you loop through it and print out the names of the people. Okay, so this one takes it to the next level here. Now we're gonna create a function to look up the name and pick a random person out of the group of people, okay? So this is something that you wanna know for the exam. You wanna be able to work with this math function, okay? So what did I say about this math function? So math.random gives you a random number between 0 and 1, okay? And you know, the floor just makes it, brings it down, it rounds it down essentially, okay? And so it's gonna return like this random number here, okay? So you picture this. Remember before I was saying, well, what good is having a random number between 0 and 1? Doesn't really do you anything, right? But when you multiply it by a range, let's say I want a random number between like, you know, 1 and 100, I mean 0 and 100, let's say, then you just multiply by 100, okay? So that's what this range is here, right? And you can get that value back here. So, you know, var lucky num equals pick random num, and then I'm passing in the length of the array, okay? What was the length of this array? This was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were 7 people in this array. So I'm passing in 7 here, okay? And so when I pull out the number here, you know, the nice thing about the floor function, it rounds it down, right? So if I get whatever number, I could get to like 0, right? So it's actually 0 to 6, right? Because I use this math.floor function. And then so I can say people, let's say I got 0 for whatever reason, right? 0 is my lucky number. Then I would show Joe, right? So the lucky one is Joe, right? People, and if my random number was 0, then I would show the lucky one is Joe, okay? So you're gonna probably wanna try to remember how to do like this type of example. So this is a good example for you to try to understand, okay? How to do a random number given the length of the array, right? So I have this case like 7 people in the array. People.length equals to 7. And so I'm going to use that to multiply that range, the 0 to 1 times the range, and then take the floor function on that, okay? So that shows the output. Okay. So this is something for like the get element ID by person, or inner HTML. So this is something where you look at the elements. So you remember like for your HTML, in this case, here's your paragraph, and you can set the ID to be persons. When I say get element by ID person, right, that's what I'm getting here, right here. And then when I say the lucky person, that whatever the text is, right? And here's a concatenation again here. You can see the plus sign here. So it's a concatenation. So lucky person is, and then the plus sign, and then the lucky one is what I kind of just got out from up here in my JavaScript here, okay? And it's the basically doing this stuff up here, okay? So I picked a random number from the array, and out came someone, right? I guess in this case it's Eduardo, right? So you pulled out Eduardo, and I concatenated this string plus the output from lucky one, right? And then I said this, and I happen to do this thing here, Okay, so I know we didn't really cover this concept on HTML. So this is a concept where you can set the ID on this tag here, and you can reference it like this, right? So you can do something like this instead of using text boxes. So what do we do from our HTML? We use these text boxes with read only, and then we printed it out into that text box. So by doing this, you don't have to write into a text box. Okay, now for the exam, you do want to understand how to assign the value in the text box, right? Because that's something that we taught at the beginning of the JavaScript, right? But what I'm saying is that you don't always have to print something into a text box. You know, from looking at websites, you know, how many times do you see something like that popping into a text box? Probably not too often, right? So more often you would see something like this, where based on like how you name the tag, you refer to it by this, okay? And then you assign it here, right? So by doing this and then creating the string here, that's how you're able to get this without showing like that text box on your screen, okay? All right, so this is a problem. I kind of used to do this for the other class, but I'm not going to do that today because I already gave you some in-class assignment from before, so that's fine. You can look at this on your own time. If you feel like kind of using this to try to practice for the exam, that's fine, because you will get some similar problem like that, like this for the exam, okay? But I'm not going to have you do it as part of your online in-class work. You could take a look at your own time because I posted this up onto the onto the resources, the page with the slides and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm going to come back to here and I'm going to start to put this code in here so you can see this in action a little bit. Okay. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to implement, let's see, function. And range. And in this example, I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about variable scoping. Okay, so let me type this in here and then I'll talk to you about what that means. And so this doesn't do anything at all because I didn't really call this function yet. But before I call this function, I want to kind of go to the concept of variable scoping. So when I declare a variable up at the top here, right, or wherever that's outside this function, that variable is visible like all over the place, right? Like, so I can refer to the variable up here. I can refer to it within the function and it knows what it is, okay? It's not really good practice to look at that way because that's what is referred to in computer science as a global variable, okay? So ideally, you work with the variables within that area, right? So if I have it out here, then I work with it out here. And if I want to pass a value back and forth between the outside, this is the outside here, with the function, then I would pass it in. Like in this case, I'm using range, and then I'm returning the value out here, right? So I shouldn't really try to refer to this, in this case, the variable people, this array in here directly, although I can, okay? I can do that because I declared the variable out here. Within the function, I can see this. Now, when I say variable scoping, you might imagine, can people out here actually see this variable? I declared this variable here, okay? Now, I guess you can kind of figure out by the fact that I'm talking about this, it kind of means that you cannot see the variable out here, okay? So just for kicks, I'm gonna say this var equals 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to do this. So what I said is true. That should mean that even though I set a value to bogus here of 1, 2, 3, and this also answers the other question, do I need the variable to declare the variable for bogus or not up here? I don't, right? So if I run this, oops, line 8, well, okay, now it's bad, right? So bogus is not defined, right? So this up here, the fact that I declared the variable bogus here, it doesn't see it out here, right? So this is what I mean, like, here's like the overall program script, right? Within the function here, even though I declared the bogus here, it doesn't recognize it, right? So you can see defined, not defined in line 8 here, okay? So in this case, it does actually want me to declare the variable up here. So I'm going to say variable equals to 0. All right, now I'm going to run it. And you can see I have 0. Okay, so the fact that I declared it as 1, 2, 3 doesn't mean anything. Okay, it's only visible within this function, right? So just to make my point here, this is, I'm going to say outside. This. And you can still see it's 0, right? In this case, because I put this string here, now it says this is a number, but I'm going to make this a string so I can concatenate these two together. So I have outside 0, okay? Now let me put this inside of here and let's see what happens. So I'm going to put inside here. All right, so what does that look like? Well, nothing, because I didn't even call this function pick random yet. Okay. So what was I going to do with this here? I was going to say, oh, I was going to pick out the number from here. I'm going to return this number here. So var lucky equals to 0. And I'm going to say lucky equals to pick random. And then I'm going to say people dot length. Right. So you remember what we're doing here, right? So I'm passing in the length of the array to get a random bucket out of that, that array. So I have to pass in the length because the math.random only gives me a random number between 0 and 1. Okay, so that's what I did here. Pick random people.length. I did the same thing here. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so you can see inside is 1, 2, 3. Okay, which is this line right here. Okay, bogus and bogus. Okay, so when people talk to you about variable scoping, this is what's happening, right? So when I declare this variable up here, it sees it. And when I declare the variable in here, it sees this version within the function. Okay, so let me show this again in a different way. Let me take out this line. All right, so what do you think will happen here? Right, now it became 0 because when I don't declare the variable within the function, it will take the global version, which is this version here. It will look at that. So essentially, when I declare this variable bogus inside the function, I'm creating my own version of it within this function here. Okay, when I don't do that, I can actually access any variable that I declare up here. In this case, it's bogus, right? I'm able to get that and show that on the inside here. Okay, but this is, again, not good practice. Okay, you need to be able to show what they call compartmentalization, right? So not be able to use these variables all over the place because you'll get lost in the code. You won't have an idea of like what you're talking about if you name variables that are like global variables used all over the place and see where where like some data is going. It gets very messy when you do that. Okay. So that's a little bit about variable scoping while I happen to be here. So enough of that. So let's kill this one here. And let's see what lucky looks like. So I'm just going to say lucky like this. And I'm going to say lucky here like that. All right. So we have lucky 1. Let's run it again. Lucky 0, 2, 3. Some random numbers here, right? How many elements do we have? We have 4 elements, right? So you would expect something from 0 to 3, right? Which is what we get, right? Because we did this math floor function, we end up with random numbers between 0 to 3. Okay. So now let's say I have, I have the random number here. So now I want to see if I can pick out the random people here. So let me do people I like that. And like that. Lucky Mary, Tom, Bill, so on and so forth. Okay, so by me getting a random number and then accessing one of those buckets in the array, I get to print out a lucky person that I drew from the hat. Okay, so it's a random person. Okay, so again, this is another example which hopefully covers a number of different things, whether it's like variable scoping, which I was mentioning is an important thing for you to know. So we'll give you pieces of code sort of like this, and we'll kind of say, okay, what's the value for bogus at the end here? And just like, you saw me do like the print down here, right? And if I happen to declare the bogus down here, I might ask you, what's the value in here? What's the value out here? Okay, so just like this example I just kind of showed you, you're able to come back and tell me, oh, yeah, the value, if I looked at it over here is this, the value if I looked at it over here is this, okay? So it's like this variable tracing that you would do, and that's part of what you would do in the exam also, okay? So do try to understand this concept also, okay? So let me see here. So we want to go over in the class assignment at the end. Okay, so let me see here. Class assignment. Yeah. So for the class assignment, this is where I was saying you can just show all of these here and just put in like, a document right? A document right like this for J, right? So whatever the values for J is, okay? And you can just show it just like this, right? So if I'm here, I might just do this and do something like this, right? Something like that, okay? So just like a little bit of a screenshot, or in this case, I did a snippet of your JSDO and showing how you're able to go through this, right? And, you know, I'm not going to really make you do an example for every single thing I just did in class today. You might want to replay the video. You might maybe look at my smaller video clips, but everything I just covered today is something that you need to know, right? Variable scoping is important. Arrays are important. The iterations or the for loops are important. Like all that stuff that I just did today in some form or shape is going to be on the exam. So you make sure you understand that, right? This document, get element, right? Make sure you understand all these different things, okay? Hopefully, did I answer everybody's questions? I'm trying to look at my little chat here. Okay, are there any other questions? You can send it to the chat and I can pick it up. Okay, well, anyway, if you guys come up with some questions afterwards, just pop me an email. Either I can respond to you on email, then you can, or you can pop into my office hour, but you're gonna pop into my office hour, make sure you just give me a heads up so I can get a time slot for you. All right, so what do we have to submit? This, right? So just put these are 4 different loops here, right? So where it says ... just put in a document, right? Like this for J. So write whatever these values of J are as you're going through the loop here. And then let's say in JSDO, then just send me, in this case, I'm using the snipping tool, right? So I'm doing snipping like that, right? So that's what you should submit. Okay, so write these 4 loops and submit. You can take a phone out if you want to use your phone, right? Just take a picture of it and send it to me too. I don't really care. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Yeah, send me an email again if there's any questions. If you want to do office hours with me, just again, send me an email. I'll lock up a time for you and we can, you know, bang it out, right? Do whatever you need. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the class, actually your assignments count for a lot for this class. Although I can't sit here and give you an answer for your assignment, I can help you debug it, or I can help you do whatever and give you some hints and stuff like that. You know, really the assignments count for 2/3 of the grade for this class. So if you do well with the assignments, you know, it's a good thing, obviously, but if you don't do your assignments or you only get half credit for your assignment, it actually hurts a lot. So I want you to do well in your assignments, and you know, don't, like I said, I'm not going to give you an answer for sure, but I can help you with ideas on how to debug things. I can help you to understand certain concepts you may not be understanding. So don't hesitate, because these assignments are important. Okay. Anyway, take a look at the sample questions I put out there for exam 2. I'm pushing the TAs to make sure all the grades are out there as soon as possible. But if there's anything else, just feel free to pop me an email, okay? All right, so I'm gonna wrap it up for tonight. Enjoy the rest of the night, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday. All right, thank you.
Take care, Professor.
All right, you too.